Hey guys, welcome back to Face to Face. We are starting a new book today, and I'm so excited. It is by Bob Goff, and it is a book called Love Does for Kids. Now, there's a Love Does for Adults, but I want to read to you the children's version. It has very short stories. There are 46 little bitty chapters. So we're just going to read a couple chapters at a time, and I will post new ones every day. So we're going to get started in Love Does for Kids. So here we go. I will read the prologue. When God planned his great caper to save the whole world, do you know who he picked to do it? A little kid. The child's name was Jesus, and he grew up in a town called Nazareth. I bet Jesus went to school, helped his parents with chores, and played outside just like you. Do you know what was amazing about Jesus, though? He wasn't just an ordinary kid. He was God with us here on earth. Before Jesus was born, I imagine that God saw lots of sad things in the world. I bet he saw that the people he created and loved had forgotten who they really were, and he probably thought of lots of ways to make things right again. God could have picked someone well-known or popular or powerful to lead everyone back to him, but he didn't. God chose to rescue the world through a little boy. The boy became a teacher when he grew up, and he traveled with his friends, healing people and telling them the exciting news that God had come to save them and to be with them. One day, Jesus' friends asked what the kingdom of heaven was like. One of them worked up the courage to ask, "In your kingdom, who will be the greatest?" At that time, Jesus' disciples did not quite understand the difference between someone being powerful and someone being important, and that those aren't necessarily the same thing. Jesus looked over and saw a little kid who was listening in on their conversation. He called the child over and placed his hand on the little one's head. I can picture Jesus smiling a little. His friends were always asking him questions like this, but Jesus never seemed to mind. "Friends," Jesus said, "I'm going to tell you the truth. Unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. In my kingdom, the most humble ones, the ones who are like this child, will be the greatest." Those words are still true today. Jesus' friends worried about which of them would be first in line and who was God's favorite. But Jesus came to teach his friends a whole new way of thinking, a way that seemed backwards and upside down. Jesus' kingdom is about the things that are really important. Things like faith, grace, love, and forgiveness. In Jesus' kingdom, the people with the most power are actually the ones with the most humility. And the leaders are those who serve others. Jesus' kingdom is for people with hearts like children, people who trust God to provide for them like a good daddy would. Jesus came to let us know that we can bring all our imagination and whimsy to him, and he will give us pure hearts in return. This book is for kids, big and small. This book is about the new kingdom Jesus invites us all to be a part of, a kingdom we can only enter if we are just like kids. In the kingdom of heaven, we are all becoming a little more like children and a little more like love, and learning a little more about what love does. Okay, here's the first picture. Oh, this looks fun. It's like a classroom. Okay. When I was in kindergarten, we had nap time every afternoon. I know, it sounds so boring, right? I thought so too. The only thing I liked about nap time was a special job I hoped to get. Every day the teacher would pick someone to be the wake-up fairy. The wake-up fairy got to put on wings, tap people on their shoulders with a magic wand, and announce that it was time to wake up. I thought it was the coolest job in the world, and I could not wait for my turn. One day, my moment finally came. My teacher picked me to be the wake-up fairy. It's finally my chance. I'll be the best wake-up fairy the world has ever seen, I thought to myself. I put on the fairy wings, grabbed the wand, and headed around the room to do my job, but I was so excited that that I forgot to walk carefully. As I ran through the classroom tapping my friends on their shoulders, I stepped on somebody's nose. My teacher was not happy. In fact, I'd had so much trouble listening and following directions that she took away my wand and wings. To tell you the truth, I felt pretty awful. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I was just so excited to do my job that I forgot to look where I was going. Has that ever happened to you? Have you ever tried your hardest to do the right thing but messed up anyway? We've all messed up now and then, and it can feel pretty awful. What I learned later in life from Jesus is that when we mess up, we don't have to keep feeling awful. When Jesus picked out his friends and asked them to spend time with him, he didn't go to the people who were the smartest in school or the most popular. He didn't even look for the people with fancy jobs and nice houses or those who made a lot of money. He definitely didn't look for people who always listened to their teachers or the ones who hadn't made mistakes before. The Bible says Jesus saw a few fishermen near the edge of a lake and chose them to be his closest friends. I bet those fishermen had so much trouble in school that they didn't even go anymore. They probably didn't even have their nets on the right side of the boat most of the time, but Jesus picked them anyway. Jesus asked a tax collector to follow him. Nobody liked tax collectors because they stole other people's lunch money and called it their own. In fact, Jesus spent so much time with people who had made big mistakes that people started saying not nice things to Jesus behind his back. But Jesus didn't care what it looked like if he loved people who had made mistakes. He wanted everybody who had ever messed up to know that he liked them all the same. He even used their mistakes to prove how much he really loved them. It's sometimes easy to think that when we make a mistake, we are somehow a little less worthy of being loved, or that when people think about us, they'll only think about the mistakes we made. What I didn't realize when I made my big mistake in kindergarten is that God's love for us doesn't change on our worst days. Come to think of it, we cannot earn more of God's love on our best days. We are simply loved by God no matter what. And because of Jesus, God does not define us by our mistakes. That day as the wake-up fairy was not my only bad day at school. School was always hard for me, and at times I wanted to quit. But you know what? I didn't. I believed that Jesus loved me even when I struggled because the stories I had read about Jesus showed he didn't see people for their mistakes. He saw them for who they were becoming, even when they couldn't see it for themselves. What I didn't know as a failed wake-up fairy was that someday, if I kept at it, I would go to school to become a lawyer. I would get the chance to help kids around the world by starting new schools that they could go to. And the one rule we have for our students at our school is this: we always try our best, but when we make mistakes, we remember how much Jesus loves us no matter what. Jesus knew that mistakes don't keep people from doing important things. Remember, those fishermen he met by the lake, they would end up traveling all over, telling people about Jesus. And that tax collector, he eventually started a church. Can you believe that? All of this happened because Jesus told each of his friends who they were becoming, and they believed him. So, the next time you make a mistake, just think to yourself, I am loved, I am God's, and I wonder who God is turning me into. Here's the answer. You are becoming a helper. You are becoming a leader. You are becoming love. That was chapter 1. Chapter 2. Room rent. Okay, here's the picture for it. It's super fun. I love to bike ride. How fun is that? Okay. I spent a lot of time at my Grandma Mary's house when I was growing up. I loved her because she really liked me and because she was always coming up with capers and mischief. Whenever I would visit, she'd have a project or two waiting. One day, we'd build a solar oven together by setting a cardboard box lined with tin foil out in the sun and make grilled cheese sandwiches. The next day, we'd make rock candy out of sugar and water and watch it grow on a string. Grandma Mary never learned how to drive a car. So she rode a tricycle everywhere she went, even as a grown-up. Most weeks, I'd ride my bike to her house, and Grandma Mary would hop on her tricycle so we could ride to the hardware store to buy supplies for the next project. I was a really active kid, and Grandma Mary delighted in running around after her red-headed, freckle-faced tornado of a grandson. I think it was because she had more than a little tornado in her, too. One of my favorite activities was to gather every single pillow in her house and make a huge pile in the living room. Grandma Mary and I would stand on the couch and jump into the pile together, rolling in the pillows and laughing so hard that tears ran down our cheeks. Grandma Mary loved me so much that she even gave me my very own room in her house. It wasn't fancy. It had only a bed and a desk with an antique sewing machine on it. In one of the desk drawers, Grandma Mary would leave me nickels and dimes. She called it room rent. It's only right to pay you rent if I'm going to use your room for sewing while you're at school, she said. The funny thing is, I can't remember Grandma Mary ever sewing a thing. Even so, every time I went to her house, I'd race upstairs to check my room rent drawer. I'd always find a handful of change. And then we'd set off on our bicycle and tricycle and head to the store to get a candy bar or to the materials for our next project. It's easy to think that loving people the way Jesus did means we have to do really big things for them. The kinds of things the whole world will see, or people will write about in newspapers, talk about in the news, or make into a movie. Doing big things to love people is fantastic. But what I learned from Grandma Mary is that big love does not need to attract big attention. We need to give love away like we're made of it. And sometimes that comes out in the smallest, simplest acts of kindness. It didn't make much sense for Grandma Mary to pay me rent for a room that was already hers. Why would you pay rent to a little kid when you own the whole house? Why would you give so much time to make one person feel so special? Even though they may not have looked big to most people, Grandma Mary's simple acts of love shaped the person I grew up to be. I knew that I wanted to show the same kindness to my own kids one day, and that I wanted to be the type of person who helps other people too. Because Grandma Mary gave me so much love, I learned how to give more love away. Lots of things in Jesus' kingdom seem to be the opposite of what you would expect. Jesus said that the people who weren't well known would be leaders. He said that the people who were overlooked would actually be most noticed by him. And in Jesus' kingdom, our small acts of love can help other people in really big ways. When we give our love away, we're not paying Jesus back for what he's done for us. It's actually just the opposite. It's like he's left room rent in our dresser drawer. And he can't wait to see how we will use what he has given us to love others. I love that. Okay, chapter 3. Looks like that's him. Red-headed freckles. Words of life. When I was in elementary school, I played on a Little League baseball team. I wasn't very good at sports, but that did not stop me from playing. My teammates figured out early on that if I stood next to the plate and waited to get hit with the ball that was pitched, I would get an automatic walk to first base, and my team would probably get more points. One day toward the end of the game, I had a choice to make. Should I take a ball to the shoulder like I always do, or should I try to actually swing the bat and make a hit? At the last moment, I closed my eyes, swung, and miraculously heard a dull whap as my bat connected with the ball. It was a home run. I raced around the plates, slid victoriously into home plate, and our team won the game. A week or so later, my mom came into my room and told me I had some mail. Mail for me? I opened the big envelope and found a card inside. I think it was the first card I'd ever received in the mail, and it was shaped like an apple. Are all cards shaped like an apple? I wondered. When I opened the card, I saw the words, "You are the apple of my eye." Printed inside underneath was a note written, "Wow, what a hit. Bob, you're a real ball player. Love, Coach." I read the words again, over and over. Me? A real ball player? Part of me couldn't believe it, but the words sank in because of who they were from. I trusted my coach, and if he thought I was a real ball player, then maybe I was. This was my first experience with just how powerful words can be. After I grew up, I had a daughter named Lindsay, and she was scared of getting in trouble at school. If students forgot their homework or forgot to get a paper signed, the teacher would send home a note to their parents, and the thought of having a note sent home grew into a huge fear in her mind. Sweet Maria and I had to sit down with Lindsay to talk about it. "Honey," we said in all seriousness, "we need you to go get a note from your teacher." What Lindsay did not realize is that making mistakes is okay sometimes. The day Lindsay finally got a note, she climbed into the car after school in tears. "I got a note from my teacher," she cried. "I forgot to get my test signed." Do you know what Sweet Maria and I did? We cheered. Instead of signing the note from the teacher like I was supposed to, I wrote over the small wrinkled paper in huge letters, "Lindsay is a great kid." You see, this is what God's grace is like. Grace is Jesus writing, "You are a great kid," over the mistakes in your life. Because I'm Lindsay's dad, she trusted me when I said she was a great kid, the same way I trusted my coach when he said I was a real ball player. We can trust Jesus the same way. Did you know that one of Jesus' disciples made a really big, huge mistake one time? His name was Peter. And right before Jesus was crucified, Peter got scared and started telling people he didn't know who Jesus was. He had promised to be friends with Jesus, but at Jesus' hardest moment, Peter was not the great friend at all. Do you know what Jesus did later? He forgave Peter and told him, "Peter, you're a rock. When people look at you, they're going to think of me, and I'm going to use you to start my whole church. You're a real ball player. You're a great kid. You're a rock." These are all such different words, and on their own they might not have much meaning. But when spoken with love, at just the right moment, these words have the power to change everything, even to change your life. That's why it matters how we choose to use our words. We have the ability to be each other's mirrors, to reflect back to each other who we're becoming. The words we say to one another have tremendous power, so let's make them words of life. Shiny pennies. When I was little, I thought the candy store owner was the luckiest man in the whole world. He could have candy anytime he wanted. I visited him regularly, bringing with me the coins I had collected from my room rent. Back then, most pieces of candy cost just a cent or two. So every time I had a few coins, I would wander down to his store, walk around, and marvel at the jars of colorful candy lining the walls. I didn't want some of it. I wanted all of it. After I had made my selection, I would place the candy on the counter by the cash register and put all the change I had next to it. Learning how to count money had been hard for me, but the shopkeeper was a kind, grandfatherly man who would lean over the counter and slowly help me count the coins, pausing to remind me what each one was worth. Most days he would smile and nod after he got to the correct amount, scoop up the change that was his, and hand the rest back to me. I usually didn't even make it out the door with my candy, and instead would sit in the shop while I ate it. I would watch the shopkeeper interact with other customers in the same gentle, kind way, pausing in his friendly conversations to count change, keep what was his, and return the rest. One day, when I brought my candy and change to the counter, the candy store owner did not smile after counting my change. Instead, he sighed and said, "I think we're 1 penny short." I liked that he said "we" because it made me feel like I wasn't alone with my problem. After a moment, he said, "I have an idea." The shopkeeper reached behind him and grabbed a bottle of vinegar, some salt, and a cleaning rag. He picked up one of my old pennies, poured a little vinegar on it, added a pinch of salt, and rubbed it with the cleaning rag. I leaned in as if I was watching a magic trick. Slowly, my penny turned from dull brown to a brilliant, shiny copper color. The storekeeper looked up. "In my store," he said with a grin and a twinkle in his eye, "shiny pennies are worth double." Now I knew the shiny pennies weren't actually worth double, but I believed the shopkeeper that day because of who he was. Words spoken from kind people have the power to change everything. He liked me, and he owned the store, and he made up the rule just for me. In many ways, we are like my old penny that I offered to the storekeeper. We aren't enough on our own, but God still decides to see us as incredibly valuable to him. This is called grace. God's grace is a lot like the candy store owner with a cleaning rag, making us brand new. The beautiful thing about grace is that we got to show it to others. We can decide that people are worth a whole lot to us because they are also worth so much to God. We get to forgive people even when they hurt our feelings or take something away from us. And in this way, we can show them what God is like. We get to decide what shiny pennies are worth. We get to decide that shiny pennies are worth double. Okay, let's do one more. Looks like they're going camping. I'm with you. People can get lost in lots of different ways. Sometimes they get confused about where they are, like getting lost in the grocery store. Other times they can feel lost because they're unsure about who they are. Some people even get amnesia and forget about themselves. They don't even remember their names. Can you imagine what that would be like? I've never forgotten my name before, but a couple times I've forgotten who God made me to be. I already told you I was never very good at school. Eventually in high school, I decided that the best thing for me to do was to give up on school altogether. I decided I'd do what I always wanted to do, move to the mountains in Yosemite, a big, beautiful national park, and become a forest ranger. I would climb mountains, live in a tent, and eat hot dogs and Pop-Tarts. I was sure it would be awesome. Looking back now, I can see that I was a little lost. I knew exactly where I was, but I didn't know who I was. Before I left for the mountains, I went to see my friend Randy. Randy was a young life leader at my high school. He was a grown-up who liked to hang out with high school kids and tell them about Jesus. I wasn't sure about Jesus yet, but I really liked Randy, so I drove to his house to say goodbye. As I told Randy my plan to move to the mountains, he didn't tell me what a bad idea it was or make me feel worse than I already did. Deep down, I knew I should finish school. Instead, he excused himself to get something from his room. After a few minutes, Randy came back to the front door. Do you know what he had with him? He had a backpack over one shoulder and a sleeping bag under his arm. Randy didn't make a speech. Instead, he said what people who are lost need to hear from someone they trust. I'm with you. He walked out to the car with me, put his sleeping bag on top of mine, and climbed into the passenger seat. Randy wasn't just saying that he was with me to be nice. He was actually with me in the car as we drove all the way to Yosemite. He told me that he would stay with me while I got settled into my new life and tried to find a job. I didn't have much of a plan, but the little one I had started falling apart as soon as I arrived at Yosemite. I couldn't find a job or even a place to stay. Randy and I were too big to sleep in the car, too cold to sleep outside, so we snuck into an unused tent at a campground and slept there. After just a few days at Yosemite, I told Randy with a sigh, "This isn't working out very well at all. Maybe I should just go back home and finish high school." Once again, Randy said the same thing he'd been saying the whole time. "Bob, I'm still with you. God made everyone who has ever been alive. That's a lot of people. He made us so we'd love him. Sometimes it's hard to remember that. In fact, it wasn't long after he made us that we wandered away from him. We were all lost, kind of like I was in high school. We'd forgotten who he made us to be, his people. So God made a plan to make things right in the world. He decided to send his son, Jesus, to earth to be with us. God doesn't try to talk us out of going on adventures, but he stays close to the people who have forgotten who they are. He's with them the same way Randy was with me. And we get to do the same thing for our friends too. The next time your friends seem a little lost or like they've forgotten who they are, do what Randy did. You don't need to say a lot. Just tell them that you're with them, just like God is always with us, no matter what. Oh, so good. All right, guys. Well, we will come back tomorrow and do chapters 6 through 10. I hope you have a great night. Bye.